Ted Bundy didn't look like a killer. He was clean-cut, confident, articulate, the kind of man you might trust to help you fix a flat tire or carry your groceries. In the 1970s, that mattered. Appearances still meant something, and Bundy knew that better than anyone. In an era before mass surveillance, before cell phones, and before DNA testing, Bundy was able to slip through the cracks not just because of a lack of evidence, but because no one believed a man like him could be capable of such horror. That disbelief would become his greatest weapon. Bundy's story doesn't begin with blood. It begins with charm. He studied psychology, worked on a crisis hotline, even volunteered for political campaigns. He mimicked the lives of respectable men, not because he wanted to be one, but because he understood how society defined safe. And behind that mask, something darker stirred. Long before his name became synonymous with terror, women began disappearing, one by one, without explanation. Their bodies never found, their stories never finished. But no one suspected the quiet law student in the Volkswagen Bug. Why would they? He wasn't just hiding in plain sight. He thrived there. To understand Bundy, you have to understand the era. The early 1970s in America were a time of cultural upheaval. The Manson murders had shocked the country, but the idea of a serial killer, a term not yet even in widespread use, was foreign to most people. There was no national database. Police departments didn't talk to each other. Women vanished in Washington, Oregon, Utah, and Colorado. And no one realized it was the same man. Bundy used that chaos like an artist uses a canvas. The myth of Bundy grew not just because of what he did, but because of how he made people feel. Reporters called him handsome, brilliant, well-spoken. Some women wrote love letters to him in prison. Even years after his death, true crime fans continue to argue over the nature of his appeal. But here's the thing no one wants to admit. Ted Bundy didn't succeed because he was a genius. He succeeded because the system let him, because society was, and still is, willing to give certain men the benefit of the doubt, no matter how many women vanish around them. In this series, we're not going to glorify Bundy. We're going to dismantle the myth. Behind the headlines, beneath the courtroom spectacle, inside the mind of a predator who weaponized trust and used it to turn everyday moments into nightmares. Because understanding how Bundy fooled the world might just help us recognize the monsters still hiding among us. The year was 1974. Across the Pacific Northwest, young women were disappearing. Smart, independent, and full of life. Until they were gone. No signs of struggle, no bodies, just silence. It began quietly. A student didn't return home. Another missed an exam. Then another didn't show up for work. Parents called the police, but there were no leads, just empty dorm rooms, unanswered phones, and missing person posters that grew thicker by the week. The strange part? Each woman looked eerily similar. Long dark hair, parted in the middle. College age, slender build, attractive. All vanished in daylight, often from public places. Yet still, no connections were made, because no one was looking for a man like Ted Bundy. February 1st, 1974. Linda Ann Healy, a senior at the University of Washington, bright, popular. She worked on radio broadcasts for the campus ski report. That morning, her roommate found her bed made, but strangely, the pillow was bloodstained. Her bike and backpack were still there. Only Linda was gone. That's how it began. March 12th. Donna Manson, a free-spirited freshman, disappeared while walking to a concert. April 17th. Susan Rancourt, seen leaving a meeting at Central Washington State College. May 6th, Roberta Kathleen Parks vanished from the Oregon State University campus. She had been planning a quiet night alone. One by one, these women were taken from places that should have been safe. Bundy wasn't breaking into homes. He was blending in, with a fake cast on his arm, asking for help loading a sailboat. He played helpless, and they offered kindness. And that was the trap. July 14th, 1974. Lake Sammamish State Park, a crowded public place. Middle of the day, hundreds of people, two women, Janice Ott and Denise Naslin, disappeared within hours of each other. Witnesses remembered a man named Ted, with his arm in a sling, asking for help loading his boat. Some even saw him approach Janice and lead her away. Later, he tried the same trick with others, and yet he was calm, polite, disarming. It would take months before police began connecting the dots. But by then, Bundy was already gone. The horror of it wasn't just the numbers. It was the confidence, the way he evolved, how each attack grew bolder, more public, more daring. The Pacific Northwest had a predator, but no one had a face or a name. Even with composite sketches and survivor accounts, Bundy stayed one step ahead. He didn't leave fingerprints. He didn't use guns. His weapon was trust, and it was invisible. And still, the disappearances continued. When you read the list of names today, it's easy to feel detached. But behind each name was a family, a circle of friends, a life interrupted. These weren't statistics. They were daughters, sisters, students. Their stories were never supposed to end this way. Bundy didn't just murder, he erased. But in the erasure, he left a pattern. And that pattern was about to catch up with him, because his next mistake would come not in the woods, but in a mall parking lot in broad daylight, with a woman who refused to die. By the summer of 1974, the name Ted had begun surfacing in multiple police reports across Washington state. But Ted Bundy didn't wait around to be caught. As pressure mounted and sketches circulated, he vanished from Seattle. Not into hiding, but into motion. Bundy understood something most killers didn't. Mobility was safety. And so he drove south through Oregon, east into Utah, and then into Colorado. With every mile, he shed suspicion like old skin and started again. Because Ted Bundy wasn't just hunting, he was migrating. Utah, October 1974. Melissa Smith, the 17-year-old daughter of a police chief, vanished after leaving a pizza parlor. 9 days later, her body was found in the mountains. 2 weeks after that, 17-year-old Laura Amy disappeared. Her body wouldn't be found until the following month. Brutally assaulted, discarded like debris. Bundy was escalating, but he also began slipping. In Utah, he was outside his comfort zone. Different geography, new victims, more police coordination. The cracks were forming, and that's when he made his first real mistake. November 8th, 1974. Murray, Utah. A young woman named Carol Duranch was approached by a man claiming to be a police officer. He told her car had been broken into and she needed to come with him to the station. Carol hesitated, but Bundy was calm, professional, and flashed a fake badge. She got in the car. Minutes later, she realized something was wrong. There was no police station. The car didn't slow down. And when she tried to open the door, Bundy snapped. He tried to handcuff her. One cuff locked, but she fought back, kicked, screamed, fought for her life, and somehow she got away. Carol Duranch would become one of the only women to survive a direct attack by Bundy, and her escape changed everything. Police now had a victim, a composite sketch, a partial license plate, and eventually a name, Ted Bundy, a student at the University of Utah Law School, well-dressed, polite, smart. But no one could quite believe it. It wasn't just disbelief, it was denial. How could someone like him be responsible for this carnage? Then in August 1975, in a quiet suburb near Salt Lake City, a patrol officer noticed a suspicious tan Volkswagen Beetle parked near a home. Inside, a ski mask, a crowbar, handcuffs, rope, trash bags. Bundy claimed it was all a misunderstanding. "Just tool," he said. He smiled, stayed calm, even flirted with the arresting officers. But the facade was cracking, because this time, he wouldn't talk his way out of it. Ted Bundy was finally under arrest, and with him, the illusion collapsed. The media had their golden suspect. The families had a name, but this was only the beginning. Bundy hadn't confessed. He hadn't broken. And what police didn't know, What no one knew was just how far his crimes reached. Because while investigators were trying to piece together the puzzle in Utah, Bundy was already planning his next escape, and what came next would horrify the nation. By 1976, Ted Bundy was in custody, but no one realized cages meant nothing to him. Awaiting trial in Colorado for the kidnapping of Carol Duranche, Bundy remained charming, composed, and eerily calm. To the press, he played the victim, a bright young law student being wrongfully accused. He smiled in court, spoke with reporters, defended himself, and all the while he was watching, observing every weakness in the system. His first escape was almost absurd. In June 1977, Bundy was granted access to the courthouse library, alone and unshackled. There were no guards, no cameras, just a window on the second floor. He jumped and disappeared into the woods for 6 days. When he was recaptured, police thought they had him for good. They were wrong. By December, Bundy had lost weight, intentionally. Guards didn't notice. He'd sawed a hole in the ceiling of his cell and crawled into the jail's duct system. On New Year's Eve 1977, while the guards watched football and the city celebrated, Bundy vanished again. This time, he didn't come back. He resurfaced in Tallahassee, Florida, weeks later, under a fake name, living out of a boarding house near Florida State University. He was broke, alone, desperate, and something inside him finally snapped. January 15th, 1978, Chi Omega sorority house, 3 a.m. Bundy entered through a back door that had a broken lock. Inside, 4 women were asleep. What followed was unspeakable. Within 15 minutes, he bludgeoned and strangled Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman to death. He assaulted them with a piece of firewood, left bite marks. He beat 2 others, Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner, but they survived. Bundy left behind a scene that still haunts law enforcement. There was no motive, no pattern, just rage. Blind, sadistic rage. And he wasn't done. Just a few weeks later, he abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her middle school in Lake City, Florida. Her remains would be found nearly 2 months later in a pig shed. This wasn't just the work of a serial killer. This was destruction for the sake of destruction. Bundy was finally caught again in February 1978, pulled over in a stolen vehicle. This time, the officer didn't let him talk his way out. He had fake IDs, stolen credit cards, and when asked to identify himself, he simply said, "I wish you had killed me," because he knew. This time, it was over. But even then, Bundy wasn't finished manipulating the system. He would delay trial after trial, fire lawyers, represent himself, and turn the courtroom into theater. America watched, horrified, but captivated. This was no longer just a criminal case. This was the rise of true crime as entertainment, and Bundy was its first reluctant star. By the summer of 1979, America wasn't just watching a trial, they were watching a performance. Ted Bundy, now facing murder charges for the Chi Omega attacks and the killing of Kimberly Leach, had turned the courtroom into a stage. Cameras were rolling, reporters packed the benches. And Bundy? He loved the spotlight. He represented himself in court, dressed sharply, speaking fluently, objecting, questioning, even addressing the jury as if he were a seasoned attorney, not a man accused of mutilating college students in their sleep. It was surreal. This was the first televised trial in U.S. history, and Bundy used it masterfully. He smiled for the cameras, flirted with reporters, cross-examined witnesses. One moment, he was charming. The next, cold and predatory. It was as if 2 personalities battled behind his eyes. The man he wanted the world to see, and the monster he couldn't fully suppress. But what haunted people the most wasn't his behavior. It was how normal he looked. Viewers across America asked the same question. How could someone like him do this? Prosecutors didn't rely on theories. They presented evidence, mountains of it. Bite mark analysis that matched Bundy's teeth to Lisa Levy's wounds. Witness testimonies, eyewitness descriptions of the same man across multiple states, fibers, hair samples, timelines that lined up too perfectly to be coincidence. Bundy fought back, hard, but charm can only go so far when facts are stacked against you. On July 24, 1979, the jury deliberated for less than 7 hours. They returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts. And just days later, the sentence was handed down. Death twice, once for the Chi Omega murders, and again, in a separate trial, for the killing of Kimberly Leach. But even after the verdict, Bundy refused to fade away. He filed appeal after appeal, tried to stall execution for years. He gave interviews, some manipulative, others chillingly honest. In one moment, he blamed pornography. In another, he confessed in detail, seemingly not out of remorse but to control the narrative one last time. He wanted to be remembered, not as a killer, but as someone fascinating, complicated, powerful. And disturbingly, it worked. Even from death row, Bundy received letters from admirers. Women proposed marriage. Some believed he was innocent. Others simply wanted to be near him. He became a mirror for society's darkest fascinations, the intersection between violence and charisma, cruelty and control. But beneath all that noise, beneath the headlines and courtroom drama, were the victims, their families, their friends, their unfinished lives. Bundy had created a circus, but what he left behind was a graveyard. By the late 1980s, the clock was ticking for Ted Bundy. After a decade of appeals, manipulations, and psychological evaluations, the legal system was done playing his game. He had confessed, at least partially, admitted to more than 30 murders, though experts believe the real number may be far higher. Still, he hoped for a last-minute stay, hoped for mercy. But mercy was not something he ever gave his victims. In the final weeks leading up to his execution, Bundy became increasingly cooperative. He granted a string of interviews. The most infamous, his sit-down with psychologist James Dobson. In it, Bundy blamed pornography. He claimed it fed his fantasies, that it desensitized him, made him believe women were objects, prey. It was a calculated move, critics say, an attempt to shift blame in his final hours, to rewrite his own story. But survivors and families didn't buy it. They saw it for what it was, a last attempt at manipulation. On January 24, 1989, just before sunrise, Ted Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair. He was 42 years old. Outside the prison, crowds gathered. Some held signs, "Burn Bundy, burn." Others sold T-shirts, waved American flags, and cheered as smoke rose from the prison chimney. It was grotesque, it was cathartic, and it was complicated. For some, justice had finally been served. For others, it was never really about Bundy himself, but what he represented, a monster in plain sight, a man who preyed on kindness, on trust, on women who thought they were safe. He didn't kill in alleys or dark basements. He hunted in daylight. He wore a smile instead of a mask. But Bundy left behind more than broken lives and grieving families. He changed how America saw crime. He forced law enforcement to evolve, pushing the FBI to develop criminal profiling. He helped popularize the concept of the organized serial killer, someone who plans, stalks, and adapts. In many ways, Bundy helped the system that failed to stop him become stronger. And disturbingly, he helped define the genre we now call true crime. To this day, Ted Bundy remains a cultural obsession. His name is stamped on documentaries, podcasts, books, even fictionalized TV dramas. He studied, dissected, debated. But beneath all that fascination is a simple truth. He was not a genius. He was not a mastermind. He was a predator. And the only reason he got away with it for so long was because people didn't want to believe someone like him could exist. Ted Bundy is gone, but the echo of his crimes still lingers in textbooks, in documentaries, in our culture's collective fear. He didn't just murder dozens of women. He forced a nation to question what evil really looks like. Because evil, it turns out, doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a clean-cut man with a charming smile, a soft voice, and a cast on his arm. Bundy taught us painfully that danger doesn't always come from strangers in dark alleys. Sometimes it's the man who asks for help. Sometimes it's the one who holds the door open. Sometimes it's the one who looks just like us. So as we close this chapter, ask yourself, what made Bundy terrifying wasn't just what he did, but how he got away with it for so long. Because we overlooked the signs, because we trusted too easily, because we didn't want to believe that the real threat might be hiding in plain sight. But here's the truth. Bundy wasn't smart enough to outwit justice forever. He was just lucky that no one paid attention until it was too late. And that's why stories like this matter. Because by telling them, without glamour, without myth, we honor the victims. We learn from the past. We stay vigilant. Candle. To the families who lost daughters, sisters, and friends, we remember them, not just as statistics, not just as names in case files, but as human beings whose lives were taken far too soon. May their stories live longer than his name ever will. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. We share true crime stories that go beyond the headlines, told with care, depth, and truth. And remember, stay aware, stay human, and never forget the silence behind the smile.